Okay, well, welcome everyone. Again, I'm Eric Williams. I'm Grant Program Manager at OWEB. The Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program is part of the grant program at OWEB, and we'll get into some of the details of how that works in terms of the mechanics in the presentation. First, a little bit of background that I think many of you are probably familiar with, given the importance of the agricultural working land sector. Represents 13% of the state's gross domestic product. It is our second largest land use with over 40,000 farms and farm owners. 97% of these operations are family owned, and 2/3 of them will be changing hands in terms of ownership in the coming 2 decades. And so outlines a pretty clear need, and we heard a lot about this in the build up to the legislation that created the statute, around the need for issues around succession planning, issues around solving the economics of succession planning, and giving folks some voluntary tools to work on those issues that are so critical and important to our farm families. And so the purpose of it is to increase that economic viability of agricultural operations in the agricultural economic sector. And economic viability means the farms have to generate income and be sustainable and be protected from threats. And so part of the purpose here is to reduce conversion of ag lands and fragmentation of working lands. The purpose is also to enhance fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, and other natural resources that these working lands provide as benefits to the state as a whole. And as I mentioned, it was authorized in statute a few years ago. It passed in 2017. And pretty much right away, we appointed a commission. The commissioners are appointed by the OWEB board. There are several recommending bodies who recommend commissioner nominations, including the Board of Agriculture, the Fish and Wildlife Commission, and the Land Conservation Development Commission. And all the OWEB board also has an ex officio member. That commission got together early in 2018 and worked through that calendar year in a series of, I think it was 9 meetings out in Prineville to really start from whole cloth here with a set of rules governing the grant programs that are authorized in the statute. And that was personally very rewarding for me, seeing this group of people who didn't know each other all that well get together with such a major task ahead of them. And see how well they worked together. The knowledge and breadth of experience they brought to the table was really quite impressive. And so those rules were completed in 2018 and adopted by the OWEB board early in 2019. And then after that, we moved to, with a little bit of startup money that was included in the initial legislation, a feasibility assessment in 2019 for an important piece of the programs that are authorized under the Ag Heritage Statute. And that is, in addition to funding grants for developing conservation management plans on working lands, the statute also authorizes grants for payments for practices that implement those plans. However, in order to do that, we need to come up with a valuation methodology. And so the first step was a feasibility assessment of various types of practices and whether or not they were rated as feasible, kind of in a high, medium, low framework for developing valuation methodologies. And so that work was done. It is available on the Ag Heritage website and sets us up nicely to do the next step, which is to calculate or to develop formulas for valuing practices and figure out formulas that will make sense to implement at a broad scale. Then moving to the present. As many of you know, in 2022, the legislative session approved $5 million for the program. It's the first time we've had funding for the grant programs authorized in the statute, and that's at the $5 million level. Just for historic perspective, back in 2017, when the program was formed, it was estimated that this should be roughly a $10 million per biennium effort. And so in 2022, given that it was appropriating funds for the second year of a biennium, the request was at $5 million, or half of what would be a typical biennium's request. And so the approach here is to be at the table focusing on those big picture basics, which are food, water, and habitat, and to have the program come with tools, basically, to help working lands owners and operators achieve their goals, particularly around sustaining the agricultural value inherent in the property, sustaining the ecological services that the property provides, and also helping with the very important succession planning piece. And so we'll probably whip through all kinds of acronyms here today, which I know you're used to. None of us like it, but we all do it. And so hopefully you're familiar with OWEB, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And we use the abbreviations you see here: OAHP for the program, OAHC for the commission, and OAHF is the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Fund. And importantly, the statute created this fund in the Treasury, which is a continuously appropriated fund, which means that you don't have to use up all the money in a biennium and then request a new slug of money the next biennium. What's placed into the fund is continuously appropriated. And so we don't have to do that kind of a process. However, we do have to request what's called budget limitation to spend those funds each biennium. And here you can see the breakdown of the commission, which I alluded to earlier. It has 12 members, 5 recommended by the Board of Agriculture, 4 that are representing the farmer rancher community, 1 representing ag water quality, 2 recommended by the Fish and Wildlife Commission. Those are representing wildlife habitat interests. The position recommended by the Land Conservation and Development Commission represents knowledge and interest in conservation easements. The director of OSU Extension is by statute a member of the commission. And then 2 members are selected by the OWEB board, 1 representing natural resource interest and 1 representing tribes. And then the 12th member is an ex officio non-voting OWEB board member who serves on the commission. By statute, the commission meets at least once per year. The commission makes the program rules. And then when we have funds and launch solicitations, the commission makes the funding recommendations to the OWEB board, who then in turn makes the grant awards. And as I mentioned, the fund is a separate account. What happened in 2022 is that general funds were appropriated and then placed into this fund. And so that means the color of the money changes, so to speak, from general funds to what's called in the state budget system, other funds. And also importantly, the statute says that we may accept funds from any public or private source, so long as the use of the funds is consistent with the purpose of the program. And you can see the staff listed here. Taylor was the first hire for the program. We were really excited that he was interested in taking this challenge on as the program coordinator. We also have a conservation easement specialist position that we're currently in recruitment for right now as we speak. And we also have half of a full-time equivalent grant support specialist or administrative support. And we have successfully recruited for that position, and that person will be starting on August 1st. We're hoping to have the easement specialist on board by about September 1st. And so the grant programs authorized by the statute are listed here. Conservation management plans, which includes both development of the plans and implementation of the plans. Working land conservation covenants and easements. Covenants is in there because the statute authorizes essentially a termed easement or covenant for a period of from 20 to 50 years, or a perpetual conservation easement. And then there's also authority for providing grants for technical assistance to organizations working on those programs above, and also authority for making grants for succession planning. In terms of the conservation management plans, the commission spent quite a bit of time at those meetings in Prineville thinking about how the conservation management plan program should run, recognizing that there will be plans out there that are developed for properties that we don't have easements on, and then for properties we do have easements on, the conservation management plan would be a requirement. that it be developed. And so the commission wanted to make sure of several things in doing this. Basically, the main thrust of it is that the Ag Heritage Program's grantee, which would be an organization that works with landowners, would be in for permanent easements, perpetual dialogue, or for termed easements for a dialogue with the landowner for the term of the easement, to make sure that conversations are had on a regular basis, looking at the goals of the landowner, looking at the significant agricultural and wildlife habitat values, making sure that plans are adjusted through time as cropping practices change, markets change, ag support infrastructure changes, making sure that there's flexibility built into it so that as a result of a dialogue between the plan holder and the landowner, that that plan can be a living document that is adaptively managed through time. And of course, the importance here is to facilitate the implementation of the shared vision of the values that if it's an easement project, that the easement is designed to protect, or if it's simply a conservation management plan designed to protect ag values and habitat values, to look at how the plan is going to ensure long-term sustainability of the soil, water, plants, animals, energy, human needs, everything that's wrapped into running an agricultural operation. And this is a summary of the content of a conservation management plan. How the plan meets the purpose of the program is number one. And then, of course, you have some contact information and background. You've got an inventory that's including the site characteristics and how the site is currently managed, some short and long-term social, economic, and conservation goals, a resource analysis and identification of any resource or management concerns, and then an identification of potential plan activities and justification for those activities that were selected for implementation. And this comes right out of the administrative rules that the commission adopted. Continuing on with contents of the plan, how it's going to be implemented, including a budget, and then if applicable, maintenance plan for any infrastructure that may affect neighboring properties if it's not maintained over time, and that's typically related to drainage structures, levees, dikes, things like that. The expected outcomes, and including the social outcomes once the plan's implemented, how it'll be evaluated and managed, again, that annual conversation and dialogue that takes place, and a conflict resolution protocol so that the owner and the operator, owner-operator of the property and the conservation management plan holder can continue this relationship on into the future. And what was really important in developing this, one of the things that was really important to the commission is basically there really isn't a role here for OWEB or program staff in the details of individual working lands management. And that was by design. Where OWEB, as you all know, is a funding agency. You all are the implementers of projects that OWEB funds through its other grant programs. And the Ag Heritage Program is the same way. OWEB is not going to be the entity that's out there having those annual conversations with landowners. It was fully intentional for that to be the local or regional entity that has a relationship with the landowner and can be expected to continue that relationship into the future. So Taylor particularly has been really busy planning the initial solicitation for our first round of grants. The Ag Heritage Commission met recently, middle of April, to look at the funds that have been appropriated, figure out what makes sense to start off with in terms of its first grant solicitation offering, and selected the bulk of the funds to go to conservation easement grants, and then the remainder, about $150,000, to go toward conservation management plans. And in terms of the timing, we have planned an Ag Heritage Commission meeting for August 5th. Tentatively, we're hoping to get the meeting materials and notice posted by the end of this week for that meeting. And at that meeting, we will be going over the application materials and our timeline for the solicitation with the commission. But what that also means is that when we get this meeting posted, you can see all of those documents on the Ag Heritage Program website, including what the application forms will look like. And this program, like other OWEB programs, will use our online application system. What we'll post there are the templates that we generate from the online system that help people organize how they're going to fill in an application. So for conservation management plans for that grant, this is a graphic representation of the information that's included in the program's administrative rules around evaluation of conservation management plan proposals. And so you can see they are quite detailed. And again, that's a reflection of the time and energy the commission spent figuring out what's most important in terms of the funds that they can put out there for conservation management planning. And you can see on the interior of the graphic, the circles represent categories of evaluation criteria. And there are 8 of those. So again, quite detailed. And then around the perimeter in the rectangles, those are paraphrases of the actual language in the administrative rules for the things that we'll be looking to evaluate in conservation management plan grant applications. And that material, the administrative rules and all of that is also available on the program's website. For working lands conservation covenants and easements, the purpose here, of course, is to preserve and protect the continued use of working lands for agricultural purposes while maintaining and enhancing the fish and wildlife habitat value or other natural resource values on the land. And some things to note is that conservation management plans will need to be in place prior to closing of an easement project, and the costs for that can be included in the grant application. The program does require a 25% match for easements. And just as a note there, NRCS's agricultural land easement program also requires a 25 to 50% match. And this program is intended to line up as a regular and continuing match source for those federal funds. And as another note there, because of the passage of the appropriation here, this funding for the program, NRCS was successful in increasing its national allocation for Oregon for the agricultural land easement program. It had been $500,000 in the previous year, and this coming year, they have allocated $6.7 million for Oregon for this program. And that is directly a response to the appropriation being made by the legislature in 2022. Easements through the program are envisioned to have zones, and typically you'd have an ag zone covering whatever the area is that's under production. A habitat zone, often that could be riparian areas or other significant habitat types. And often you're going to have a building zone, which is where the infrastructure of the operation exists. And so the conservation protections embodied in the easement that are designed to protect habitat would be in that habitat zone. The easement would be designed to protect the significant agricultural value of the land in the ag zone, so that basically it would prohibit any actions that would detract from the agricultural value of the land within that ag easement zone. We're in the process of developing a conservation easement template that we'll make available to folks as a starting point for working with landowners that will have whatever the terms that we are going to expect to be in the conservation easement. We're being careful here not to include what are known as affirmative actions in the easement, which means language that says you shall do these things, but rather keeping the easement in its simplest form to clearly specify what can't happen within the particular zones. And essentially that's any actions that would detract from either the habitat value, the habitat zone, or the agricultural value of the agricultural zone. And so again, it's the same timeline as for the Conservation Management Plan grants, with our solicitation opening up in August, and we'll have applications due at the end of October. And that will start our evaluation process, which will include a recommendation from the Ag Heritage Commission, probably in March, a month ahead of the OWEB board meeting in April, where the board would make the awards under that program. And the total available for easements and covenants is $4.3 million. And you can see there's even more criteria for the conservation easements and covenants that are extracted from the administrative rules in this graphic. And again, there's 8 categories of criteria. Things like capacity of the organization, the significance of the fish and wildlife habitat, the significance of the agricultural values, and so on. I don't expect everyone to read all this here, but the point being that the commission was very deliberate in forming the set of rules that apply to the program, including how applications would be evaluated. And another thing I would want to note here that's kind of above the criteria, but they're based on this idea, which is that there is no preference for any geographical parts of the state, for any types of crops. There isn't anything in the program that would favor one type of operation over another, because it recognizes that in one region there could be an agricultural operation that is so significant socioeconomically to that region that the same operation in another part of the state might not have that same value. And so it's designed to be flexible enough to understand and evaluate the importance of both the ag and habitat values in terms of its local and regional context. The technical assistance grants that I mentioned are authorized in the statute. Those are designed to support development of projects or programs that are authorized under the statute. Given the smaller pool of funds, and this being the first time out of the gate, the commission decided not to offer funding for technical assistance grants in 2022. However, if we are fully funded for the next biennium, we will be considering adding these other grant types, including succession planning for future offerings. That one is also not on offer for the upcoming solicitation. We're working to finalize the guidance material that goes along with the grant applications, and will include the conservation easement template, knowing that that's really important for potential applicants to the program, and how they're communicating to landowners that they're working with. And we also do still plan to continue the work toward developing valuation methodology for implementation of conservation practices. The $5 million that was appropriated does include some funds for services, which include our payments to the Department of Justice to review grant agreements and conservation easements, but also there are funds there that we can potentially use to do the next phase of this it follows on the feasibility study that was done for valuing ag practices. This chart here just is in the presentation to give you a sense of the types of practices that were analyzed in that feasibility study. And the darker the color, the higher the feasibility. And so you can see that there are 4 categories of practices in here. The right-hand column is carbon. And so you can see that for carbon sequestration practices, they were all deemed highly feasible for the practice types on the left. For water quality, a lot of mid-range feasibility. For water quantity, there's a couple of high feasibility practices. And for habitat, there's a mixture of high, medium, and low feasibility. And so again, that report is on the website if you want to take a look, if you're interested in what's behind that summary chart and those recommendations. And just to recap our timeline, we're in the hiring period, and the commission will be meeting next month, and staff will be opening a solicitation next month. The application deadline planned for October 31st. And then our expert review process, we expect to complete around mid-February. That provides the materials to the commission to make its recommendations in March, lining up then for an OWEB board award in April of 2023. And there you have Taylor's contact information. And I'm also available for questions anytime from folks. And I do believe we have time, a bit of time here, next 23 minutes or so for any questions that you've got.
If you have a question, you could please raise your hand and we can see who you are.
I just wanted to say something really fast. Eric, that was fantastic pitch hitting for Taylor. Eric was not prepared to give the presentation and he just did all of that improvised. So hats off to you, sir. I also want to just mention for the crowd here that we have been recording this presentation and we will post it on the Oregon Conservation Partnership website. It's orcp.org. We will also post it on the Oregon Conservation Partnership YouTube page. So if you haven't done it yet, click like and subscribe over there. The other thing is I wanted to say that Eric, when you were presenting, for some reason the slide deck was like small enough to the side. I saw your face big and your slide deck was small. It might be my computer that it showed up that way. But as a remedy, can you and Taylor make sure that I get your slide deck after this and I can post the slide deck along with the recording? So if that comes across on anybody else's computer, then they can just pull it both and have them follow along as you speak.
Yes, absolutely, we can do that. And I think it's probably a setting, Vanessa, on your Zoom controls to allow you to switch from speaker mode to gallery mode. Might have been the culprit.
Yeah, because I saw it very well, it fit on the screen well, was displayed. So we do have some time for questions. If someone has one, could you please raise your hand? And we'll have one of these two experts answer it. And Vanessa, you might have to help let me know if you see anyone with a raised hand. I might ask one in the meantime, and that is, I'm assuming that the carbon sequestration projects that are conservation work would not be in this first vetting of projects, but if you get the $10 million in the next session, then they would fall under that funding?
Well, I would say that carbon sequestration practices certainly can be incorporated into conservation management plans that are developed with this initial solicitation. And we would encourage folks to do that. So if you've got working lands owners or operators who are interested in, hey, what practices can we implement here that might do a better job at sequestering carbon? That's what that conservation management plan development grant is for, that to work with landowners and land managers to develop potential practice changes to meet the program goals. I think, Jan, what you're referring to is funds for implementing those practices, such as on an annual basis, we would hope to offer in the next biennium if the program is funded.
Thank you. I see that Penny has a question.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask for some clarification on the distinction between grants for conservation management plans and technical assistance grants that lead to the creation of conservation management plans and conservation easement. Can you elaborate on that?
And Eric, I'm back if you want me to take it. I'm on my phone.
Oh, great. Thanks, Taylor. Just chime in anytime.
Okay.
You know, but so let me start on this one, and then if you have something to add, go ahead.
Cool.
And so that's I can understand the lack of clarity on that one because technical assistance is a pretty broad term. But essentially, it's designed to provide funding for sort of the precursors that you need to be able to be ready to apply for a conservation management plan grant or conservation easement plan or conservation easement grant. And for example, if you've got a geography that you're working in and you know you've got a number of landowners that could potentially benefit, and maybe you've talked to some of them and they're interested in some of this, but you need to do a bit more work, a lot of cups of coffee meetings to talk through the program parameters and what a conservation management plan might look like for that owner operator. A technical assistance grant could provide the funds for an organization to have those coffee table meetings, to meet with folks in a community, to do the prep work for planning, as well as to do maybe a little bit of research work to understand the the breadth of practices that might be considered for inclusion in the plan. And so Taylor, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary, Eric. I mean, the conservation management plan funding is specifically for developing a conservation management plan, whereas the technical assistance funding is for all the other things that it takes to run a program that does that. Does that make sense, Penny?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, does anyone else have a question? I'm only able to see one screen, so I don't want to miss anyone. Okay, well, I think you covered the bases so well with the presentation. There's not many questions to ask.
Yeah, and I have one.
Oh, go ahead, Nicole.
I'm afraid I missed it, but I don't want to miss my opportunity to ask it if I didn't. The conservation management plans, that funding is for an organization to develop those. But for the landowner that receives those, is there any incentive for them, or they just get the plan?
Hopefully the incentive is an operation that runs more effectively for them and accomplishes goals that they have for their property. So that's one. The other one would be to be eligible for payment for practices in the future. As we were just discussing in response to Jan's question, the plan would put them in position to, at some point in the future, then be eligible for payments for practices to implement those plans. And then the third reason is that if they are interested in having a conservation easement funded through the program, they'll have to have a conservation management plan that includes the contents that we walked through.
Thanks for clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Laura?
Hey there. So I was this whole talk caught my eye because of all of the carbon sequestration benefits that you're looking at. So I was curious, is this program basically focused on folks who have some kind of agricultural operation, or are like working lands on woodland properties also considered?
Yeah, thanks for that question. When the program was under development, there was a pretty broad coalition of folks that had initiated discussions a couple of years prior even to the adoption of the statute in 2017. And as they were getting closer to having bill language ready, the forestry community made an intentional decision to not be part of the program. And so the initial intent was to include working farms and forests, but because that constituency was not interested in it, they were not included in the legislative language. So the program is only for agricultural working lands.
Got it. Thanks.
Any other questions? We have some time here. Okay, if not, I would thank both of our presenters. That was a great PowerPoint. Look forward to seeing you at the commission meeting next week.
All right, likewise, Jan, thank you.
Oh, Laura, is that a question? Or was that your hand up from before?
No, that's just clapping.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Good job. Thank you.
Right, we'll all clap for them. And thank you so much. And the recording should be available soon.
Bye, everybody.
All right, thank you.